I said pull your seat up. The demand came from behind, sharp enough to cut through the hum of recycled air and 247 breathing bodies packed into an aluminum tube at 37,000 feet. Row 23. Seat C middle placement. Economy class. The overhead bin slammed once, then twice. Each impact deliberate. Simone Harper didn't flinch. Her fingers remained steady on her phone, the device resting against her thigh where the recording light blinked red beneath her palm. 32 years of living had taught her when to respond and when to document. This moment belonged to the latter category. Federal regulations allow passengers to recline during flight, she said, her voice level, almost conversational. If you'd like verification, the placard is attached to the seat back in front of you. The man in 23B leaned forward, bourbon breath mixed with cologne that cost more than most people spent on groceries. His knuckles whitened against her headrest. You people always got an answer, don't you? The cabin around them shifted into that particular quality of silence that wasn't quiet at all. People kept scrolling through their phones, kept pretending to read, kept their eyes as carefully averted. But the attention was there, sharp and waiting. 8 rows ahead in business class, a woman in designer athleisure raised her phone. The camera lens caught everything, framing Simone's profile against the window's harsh light. 2 rows back, the overhead speaker crackled with static before a voice cut through. Ladies and gentlemen, federal law requires compliance with all crew instructions. Title 49 of the United States Code, Section 46504, states that interference with flight crew duties is punishable by... Nobody asked for a lecture on the law. The interruption was louder now, fueled by something more than just alcohol. Simone's thumb hovered over her phone screen, the timestamp reading 1432 Universal Time Coordinated. Still recording. The device captured everything, the elevated breathing, the subtle shift of fabric as the man behind her rose slightly from his seat. The way conversations 3 rows forward died mid-sentence. Then his hand moved, not toward the call button positioned above his head, not toward his own armrest. The trajectory was clear, deliberate, heading straight for her face. You're making a mistake, Simone said, but the fist was already in motion. The phone continued recording, pixels translating violence into digital evidence. And somewhere in seat 19F, a man wearing mirrored sunglasses adjusted his position slightly, watching through lenses that reflected the cabin's fluorescent lighting. His expression remained neutral, professional. Federal agents learned patience early in their careers. He had time. The aircraft wasn't landing for another 97 minutes. 12 hours earlier, Terminal B at Charlotte Douglas International Airport thrummed with the particular chaos of pre-holiday travel. Simone stood in the economy check-in queue, boarding pass displayed on her phone screen, watching the gate agent's practiced smile form and reform with each passenger. Traveling alone today? The question carried standard issue friendliness. Yes, my husband's on assignment. The gate agent nodded, the answer requiring no follow-up. Military families passed through these terminals daily, their explanations abbreviated by necessity and security protocols. Simone didn't elaborate on which branch, didn't mention the satellite phone calls that came through encrypted channels at irregular hours, didn't reference the security clearances that redacted portions of his life, even from her. Her phone buzzed against her palm. A text from a contact saved simply as E appeared on the lock screen. Stay alert. Love you. 3 words of caution, 2 words of affection. The message contained nothing unusual, Nothing that would trigger concern in anyone reading over her shoulder. But Simone recognized the cadence, the particular way he phrased warnings without actually warning. She typed a quick response, "Always do, love you too," and pocketed the device. The boarding process moved with mechanical efficiency. Zones called over intercoms, passengers shuffling forward in groups stratified by ticket price and loyalty status. Simone waited for Zone 4, her economy ticket granting her neither priority nor the luxury of overhead bin space guaranteed. She'd packed light intentionally, backpack only, contents organized with the kind of precision most people reserved for important documents. Row 23. C sat wedged between two strangers who would become far more than that. The window seat remained empty for now, but 23B was already occupied. Garrett Wade slumped against the aisle armrest, his carry-on sprawling across legroom that technically belonged to the middle seat. 11 in the morning and whiskey weighted his breath, the scent sharp enough to make Simone's eyes water slightly. "Excuse me," she said, gesturing toward the bag. "Could you move that? I need space for mine." Wade's eyes, slightly unfocused, but tracking her movement with precision that contradicted the alcohol on his breath, flicked from her face to her backpack and back again. "There's space under your seat." Not a question. A statement designed to establish territory, to claim domain over shared resources. Simone recognized the tactic. She'd encountered it in different forms throughout her life. On different planes and trains and buses, in different waiting rooms and office spaces. The specifics changed. The underlying assumption never did. She didn't argue. Sliding her backpack forward, she noted the details that would matter later. The faded military tattoo on his forearm, edges blurred by time and perhaps regret. The expensive watch contradicting the economy ticket. The way his eyes remained too alert for someone genuinely intoxicated, suggesting either high tolerance or performance. If you're finding this story gripping, consider subscribing. We've got more true accounts of injustice being challenged and overcome. 8 rows forward, Vanessa Caldwell adjusted her ring light, the portable device designed to cast influencer-friendly illumination across her features. Business class provided extra legroom and the space required for content creation. She angled her phone camera, lips forming the smile she'd practiced in countless mirrors, perfected through thousands of posts. Flying first class today, loves. Because self-care isn't selfish. It's necessary. Her eyes, however, tracked movement in the cabin behind her. Through the gap between seats, she'd already catalogued potential content. A black woman in economy, wedged between 2 white men, one of whom clearly occupied more than his fair share of space. The optics would translate beautifully to social media. Conflict always performed well, particularly when the conflict could be framed in ways that confirmed her audience's existing beliefs. Vanessa Caldwell had built a following of 143,000 through careful curation of reality. She knew which details to highlight, which angles to shoot, which captions would generate maximum engagement. Her posts about flight experiences typically garnered 50,000 views minimum. She'd learned early that controversy multiplied those numbers exponentially. The flight attendant chief emerged from the forward galley, moving through the cabin with clipboard efficiency. Craig Denton had logged 20 years with the airline, accumulating miles and weariness in equal measure. His gaze swept across passengers with professional assessment, categorizing them by potential complications. The woman in 23C registered on his internal radar, not because she was doing anything wrong, but because she occupied space adjacent to a passenger whose body language screamed future headache. "Welcome aboard! We'll be pushing back shortly." Craig's voice carried the warmth of someone who'd delivered the same greeting several thousand times, the sincerity worn thin by repetition. His eyes lingered on Simone for perhaps 2 seconds longer than strictly necessary. Conducting that particular scan, every service worker learned. The "is this person going to be trouble" assessment? The calculation of risk versus the desire for an uneventful shift. Simone recognized the look. She'd seen it in bank lobbies and department stores, in airport security lines and traffic stops. The evaluation that preceded interaction, the judgment rendered before conversation began. She adjusted her watch, a chronograph with complications far beyond what civilian timekeeping required. Military-grade precision in a timepiece that looked expensive but not ostentatious. The watch had been a gift, selected by someone who understood the value of equipment that functioned flawlessly under pressure. Nobody asked about it. Few people noticed. Those who did rarely understood what they were seeing. Below the aircraft on the tarmac, Rex Holden signed off on the passenger manifest with practiced efficiency. Operations manager for the airline's Charlotte hub, he'd learned to anticipate problems before they manifested. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from Vanessa, a contact he'd cultivated through mutual benefit. "Got a live one in 23C. Could be good content." Rex typed a response while simultaneously reviewing fuel calculations and weather reports. "Notify me if it develops. Standard protocol." The exchange took seconds, conducted in shorthand, developed over 18 months of collaboration. Vanessa identified passengers who might generate incidents. Rex ensured those incidents resulted in settlements favorable to the airline. She received consulting fees for her trouble, payments that looked legitimate on paper, funding her lifestyle while providing the airline with advance warning of potential liability. The arrangement benefited everyone involved. Except, of course, the passengers who became content, who found themselves transformed into viral villains through selective editing and strategic captioning. Inside the cabin, Simone pulled out her tablet. The screen displayed not a novel or movie, but a document formatted in the dense language of federal regulations. Federal Aviation Regulations, Subpart D. She highlighted sections with practiced efficiency, cross-referencing footnotes that clarified crew responsibilities and passenger rights. The man in 23D, settling into the window seat, glanced over. "Lawyer? Just careful." The answer satisfied curiosity without providing information. Simone had learned economy in all things: economy of motion, economy of explanation, economy of emotional expenditure. She reviewed these regulations before every flight, noting exit row locations, crew positioning, emergency protocol variations between aircraft models. Most passengers scrolled through social media during boarding. She mapped contingencies. Her backpack contained protein bars arranged by expiration date, charging cables bundled with Velcro ties, noise-canceling headphones that cost $300 but looked generic. Everything she traveled with served multiple purposes. Everything had been selected for function over form. Order existed in the organization, but nothing about it would strike an observer as unusual. Just someone who preferred structure. The engines whined as the aircraft began its pushback from the gate. That peculiar moment when forward momentum stops and backward begins. When gravity asserts itself differently. When 247 bodies register the transition from stationary to mobile. Garrett Wade's elbow dug into the armrest. Not his armrest. The shared armrest that existed in the liminal space between seats, that belonged equally to passenger B and passenger C, according to the unwritten rules of air travel. "That's the shared armrest," Simone said, her tone conversational rather than confrontational. Wade's response came without looking at her. "First come, First served, sweetheart. The diminutive carried weight beyond its syllables. Simone didn't respond verbally. She folded her hands in her lap, closed her eyes, adopted the posture of someone settling in for a nap. But her thumb moved across her phone screen, navigating menus with touch memory precision, finding the voice memo application, pressing record. The icon appeared on her screen, small and red and documenting everything within microphone range. She positioned the phone against her leg, angled to capture audio from the seats immediately surrounding hers. The recording would continue until manually stopped or until battery depletion. Neither was likely to happen in the next 3 hours. Vanessa, meanwhile, whispered into her camera lens, her voice pitched for her phone's microphone, but not for the passengers around her. Watch this. Entitled passenger in economy thinks she owns the plane. This is going to be gold. Her lens zoomed slightly, capturing Simone's profile against the window. The composition was careful, Simone's face neutral and calm. But Vanessa knew how to crop, how to caption, how to construct narrative from raw footage. The truth mattered less than the story. The story mattered less than the engagement. Simone's phone screen illuminated briefly with another message. The encrypted messaging application that most people would assume was just another chat program. The interface looked generic, unremarkable. But the protocols running beneath that interface employed military-grade encryption, the kind reserved for communications that couldn't risk interception. Protocol Sierra 3 if needed. She didn't open the full message. Didn't need to. The protocol designation told her everything necessary. She knew what Sierra 3 meant, understood the implications, recognized the circumstances under which it should be activated. The message disappeared from her screen after 15 seconds. The application's security settings automatically deleting content after brief display. 20 minutes into the flight, Simone pressed the recline button. The mechanism engaged smoothly, tilting her seat backward by 2 inches, well within the limits established by Federal Aviation Administration regulations, the distance specifically calculated to balance passenger comfort against space constraints. The response was immediate. Hey, put that seat up!" Garrett Wade's voice, previously controlled if not entirely sober, cracked into something sharper. Heads turned throughout the cabin, passengers registering conflict in progress, making split-second decisions about whether to watch or ignore. "It's my seat," Simone said, her voice carrying clearly without rising in volume. "I'm allowed to recline. Not into my space, you're not." The emphasis transformed the phrase into something possessive, territorial. Wade leaned forward, his bulk creating shadow across Simone's peripheral vision. Craig Denton materialized in the aisle, clipboard tucked under his arm, his expression settling into the particular weariness of someone about to mediate dispute. "Is there a problem here?" The question was directed at both passengers, but the attention focused primarily on Simone, the calculation visible in Craig's eyes. She was the easier target, the one more likely to comply with requests for de-escalation. "She's invading my leg room," Wade said, gesturing at the minimal recline. Simone turned slightly, making eye contact with Craig. "I reclined within regulation." The seatback placard clearly states that passengers may adjust their seats during flight. Title 14, Code of Federal Regulations, Section 91, Subsection 11, addresses passenger compliance with crew instructions, but there's no federal regulation restricting recline within manufacturer specifications. The specificity landed with weight. Craig blinked, his expression shifting from standard-issue service smile to something more uncertain. That wasn't passenger speak. That was someone who'd studied aviation law, who could cite regulations from memory, who understood the distinction between policy and legal requirement. Ma'am, maybe for everyone's comfort, you could… Could what? Simone's interruption was surgical, precise. Give up my paid seat space because he's uncomfortable with federal regulations? The phrase federal regulations appeared again, deliberate repetition that served dual purpose, establishing her knowledge base and documenting the interaction for the recording device still active against her leg. Everything she said was being captured in digital form, timestamps and audio signatures that would prove admissible in multiple legal contexts. Wade stood, 6 feet 2 inches, former cop build running slightly to weight around the midsection, but still intimidating through sheer mass. He loomed over the seat, creating the particular variety of threat that operated through proximity rather than explicit action. You got a real mouth on you. Simone remained seated, didn't escalate through body language, didn't mirror his aggression, didn't provide ammunition for witnesses who might later claim she'd been confrontational. Instead, she activated a different protocol, one that changed the conversation's framework entirely. I'd suggest you return to your seat before this becomes a federal issue. The phrase federal issue landed with specific weight. Wade's eyes narrowed, some calculation running behind the alcohol haze and anger. Federal issue. Listen to her. Thinks she's a lawyer or something. Sir, please sit down. Craig's intervention carried authority diluted by his obvious desire to avoid paperwork. Ma'am, maybe we can find you another seat. I'm not moving. I haven't violated any policy. Look, I'm trying to keep the peace here. Work with me. Translation, clear to everyone paying attention. You're the easier target. Just comply. Make my life simpler by sacrificing your comfort. Simone met his eyes steadily. I'll work with you. File an incident report documenting Mr. Wade's verbal aggression per standard protocol. I'll provide a statement. Craig's expression tightened. Incident reports meant paperwork. Paperwork meant management review. Management review meant his performance metrics took a hit. Far easier to convince the quiet woman to relocate than to hold the aggressive man accountable. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. While Craig attempted mediation, Vanessa's fingers flew across her phone screen. 38 seconds of video uploaded to her Instagram account. The footage captured from an angle that made Wade look defensive, while Simone appeared confrontational. The caption, however, did the real work. Entitled, Woman Starts Fight on Flight, Refuses to Cooperate with Crew. This is why we can't have nice things. Flight drama, posted at 14:47 Universal Time, coordinated. Within 3 minutes, the view count reached 4,200. Comments flooded the post, the majority siding with Wade based solely on Vanessa's framing. Nobody watching had audio. Nobody could hear what had actually been said. The narrative existed independent of truth, constructed through angle and caption, and the particular biases Vanessa's audience brought to their viewing. Hit that like button if you believe in accountability for those who abuse power. This story goes deeper than you think. Wade leaned closer, his voice dropping to a register meant to be heard by Simone alone, but captured perfectly by the recording device. You think you're smart? I know your type, always playing victim. My type? Don't act ignorant. You know exactly what I mean. He grabbed her headrest, shaking it hard enough to rattle the seat frame. Simone's water bottle, positioned in the seat pocket, tipped and spilled. Liquid spread across the tray table, soaking the documents she'd been reviewing. Sir, you're now physically intimidating me. Her voice remained level, each word precisely articulated for the recording. I'm asking you to stop. Or what? You'll cry about discrimination? That card's getting old. The phone's microphone captured everything. Timestamp 14:52, 18 seconds. Universal time coordinated. Wade's voice clear and unambiguous. His exact phrasing. The audio quality sufficient for voice analysis, for pattern matching, for admission in multiple legal proceedings. Then his hand moved again. Faster this time. Open palm strike to the side of her head. Not a slap, a push strike, delivered with enough force to snap her neck sideways against the window. The impact was audible, a sound that carried across 3 rows in each direction. Simone's sharp intake of breath. The cabin's collective gasp. Vanessa's phone, still recording, capturing everything from an angle that would later prove crucial. That's what you get for running your mouth. The words hung in recycled air, witnessed by 247 pairs of eyes. Most of those eyes immediately looked away, focusing with sudden intensity on phone screens or paperback novels or the seat back in front of them. 5 passengers stood. 2 began recording. 0 intervened. From row 25, a voice called out, "Somebody get the crew!" From row 21, a different voice. Quieter, but still audible. She probably deserved it. Did you hear how she talked to him? Craig rushed back from his position near the forward galley. His face registered the scene in stages. Simone's reddening cheek, Wade's elevated breathing, the attention focused on his section. His training said one thing. His self-preservation instinct said another. The training won. Barely. "Sir, return to your seat immediately." Wade's response came fast, defensive. "She attacked me first. Verbally attacked me." Simone turned to face Craig directly, her voice carrying clearly enough that passengers 5 rows in either direction could hear every word. "I need you to file an incident report under Title 49, Code of Federal Regulations, Section 1544. Document the assault. The cockpit needs to radio ahead for law enforcement presence at the gate." Craig blinked. That wasn't passenger language. That was someone who knew procedure, who understood crew responsibilities, who could cite the specific regulation requiring documentation and reporting of in-flight assaults. The regulation existed to protect crew from liability, to establish clear chains of accountability, to ensure that incidents received appropriate law enforcement response. "Ma'am, The regulation isn't optional," Simone said. "Failure to report constitutes a violation that could result in certificate action against you personally." The threat, delivered calmly and without emphasis, landed with precision. Craig's face paled slightly. She wasn't bluffing. She knew exactly what regulations governed his conduct, knew exactly what penalties attached to failure to comply. 12 minutes later, Vanessa posted her second update. The video montage included footage from the recline dispute, the aftermath of Wade's strike, and Craig's intervention, all edited to remove context, to eliminate the actual assault, to frame Simone as the aggressor and Wade as victim defending himself against verbal attack. Update: flight attendants trying to calm her down after she started physical altercation. Crew says she has history of complaints. Stay safe, travelers. Flight from hell. 22,000 views within the first hour. The lie spread faster than correction ever could, embedding itself in the attention economy that rewarded speed over accuracy, engagement over truth. People shared without verifying. They commented without context. They judged based on 30 seconds of carefully edited footage that confirmed their existing beliefs about who deserved sympathy and who deserved suspicion. Craig pulled Simone toward the galley, away from the rows of watching passengers, away from the phones still recording intermittently. His voice dropped to a register meant for private conversation. Look, I believe something happened, but if we escalate this, it becomes a whole federal situation. Delays, investigations, bad press for the airline. You understand? He assaulted me. I'll document it in the report, but maybe we can handle this more quietly? I can move you to a different seat. First class upgrade. Complimentary. No charge. The offer was standard procedure from a certain perspective: minimize liability, satisfy the complaining passenger, avoid the complications that came with law enforcement involvement. From another perspective, it was obstruction of a federal mandate. Craig was legally required under Title 14, Code of Federal Regulations, Section 121, subsection 580, to report the assault to the pilot in command. His offer to handle this quietly represented a violation of that requirement. That's obstruction, Simone said. You're required to report. Craig shifted uncomfortably. Who are you? A passenger who knows her rights. The non-answer was precisely calculated, enough to establish competence without revealing capability, enough to make him reconsider his approach without providing information he could use against her. The line between passenger and something else remained deliberately blurred. Simone returned to row 23. Wade blocked the aisle, his body positioned to prevent her passage. Intimidation through presence, a tactic that worked on most people most of the time. You told on me? His voice carried mock surprise wrapped around genuine threat. Big mistake. He shoved her, not hard enough to knock her down, hard enough to be witnessed, hard enough to constitute a second assault, hard enough that passengers throughout the cabin registered the action and made choices about whether to document or intervene or simply watch. Simone's response was visible to everyone paying attention. She sidestepped, using minimal force to create space, her movement economical and practiced. Not aggressive, not escalating, just trained in ways that civilian self-defense classes didn't typically teach. From 22, a passenger spoke loud enough for several rows to hear. Did you see that? She knows how to handle herself. Wade's eyes narrowed, some recognition forming behind the alcohol and anger. Where'd you learn to move like that? Self-defense classes, Simone said. Nonsense. That was military. The accusation hung between them, neither confirmed nor denied. Simone said nothing, which was answer enough for Wade, even if it proved nothing to observers. His expression shifted from anger to calculation. Some mental catalog being consulted. Connections forming that would matter far more than either of them understood in that moment. Across town, below the aircraft that was still 90 minutes from landing, Rex Holden received a coded message from Craig. The system they'd developed over years of managing incidents provided shorthand that looked innocuous to anyone monitoring airline communications. Incident 23 BC. Possible L situation. L meant lawsuit. Possible meant Wade had crossed a line that couldn't be easily explained away. Rex pulled up Vanessa's social media feeds, watching her posts in real time, assessing how the narrative was developing. The footage looked good from a certain angle. It positioned Simone as confrontational, Wade as reactive, the crew as attempting to maintain order. That narrative could be defended if necessary. He composed a response to Craig while simultaneously pulling Wade's ticket information, preparing to have legal review the incident before the plane even landed. Standard protocol. Document everything. I'll prep the team. Standard protocol meant preparing settlement offers, having non-disclosure agreements ready for signature, moving quickly to contain damage before it metastasized into media attention or regulatory scrutiny. They'd done this 14 times in the previous 18 months. The pattern was established, the machinery well-oiled, the outcomes predictable. Garrett Wade pulled out the airplane phone, swiping his credit card through the reader with hands that shook slightly. Adrenaline or alcohol or both. The call connected after 2 rings. "Bryce? It's Wade. I need representation. Some woman on this flight assaulted me. Now she's threatening federal charges, and the crew's taking her side." The voice on the other end was smooth, practiced at receiving these kinds of calls. "Don't say another word. Not to crew, not to other passengers, not to anyone. I'll meet you at the gate." Bryce Langford specialized in aviation incidents, particularly those where passenger behavior intersected with assault claims. He'd built a practice around defending the accused, using procedural technicalities and aggressive victim cross-examination to muddy waters clear enough to swim through. His retainer agreements were expensive. His win rate justified the cost. What Wade didn't know, what he had no reason to suspect, was that Bryce also represented the airline in labor disputes. The conflict of interest was technical rather than practical from Bryce's perspective. He could serve both clients as long as their interests aligned. The fact that they might not align, that Wade and the airline might eventually blame each other for the incident, was a complication to be managed later if it arose. In Row 19F, Federal Air Marshal Daniel Cross hadn't moved since boarding. His position near the wing emergency exit was standard, providing sightlines across most of the cabin while positioning him to respond to threats near critical aircraft systems. The mirrored sunglasses he wore served dual purpose. They concealed his gaze while their reflective surface allowed him to monitor movement without turning his head. His lapel contained a camera so small most people would mistake it for a decorative pin. The device recorded continuously, storing footage on encrypted memory that would only be accessible through proper federal channels. Every word spoken in rows 15 through 25 was being captured in high definition. Every action, every reaction, every witness who chose involvement or chose silence. Marshal Cross had received his briefing before boarding. Standard passenger manifest review, checking for names flagged in various databases, confirming that nobody on the flight represented a credible threat to aviation security. But then a second briefing had come through encrypted channels, priority classification, information that changed his mission parameters. Simone Harper, 23C, Ethan's wife. Eyes on. The message had been brief, conveying everything necessary. Cross knew Ethan Harper, had worked operations with him in contexts that remained classified, knew his capabilities, his clearances, his particular specialized training that made him valuable to certain government entities. Knowing that Ethan's wife was on his flight changed nothing about Cross's official duties, but it added weight to his attention, elevated his interest in Row 23 beyond standard vigilance. He'd watched Wade strike Simone, had documented every moment of the assault through his lapel camera, had noted Craig's inadequate response, Vanessa's filming, the bystander effect that kept 247 passengers frozen in their seats. His training said intervene only if flight safety was compromised. Document everything else. He was documenting. His phone, secured in a holster designed to prevent accidental activation, vibrated once against his ribs. The pattern indicated encrypted message received. He didn't check it. Didn't need to. The alert itself communicated what mattered. Someone in federal law enforcement had flagged this flight, was paying attention, had resources in motion before the aircraft even began its descent. Simone felt the plane's angle change, the subtle shift that indicated descent preparation. The seatbelt sign chimed throughout the cabin, accompanied by the flight attendant's announcement about remaining seated, about preparing for landing, about the temperature and local time in Charlotte. She checked her phone. Recording duration, 2 hours, 14 minutes, 37 seconds. Battery level, 68%. Sufficient for several more hours if needed, but the flight was nearly over. The evidence was captured. Everything that mattered existed in digital form, secured and time-stamped and admissible. She drafted a text message but didn't send it yet, just composed the words, preparing for transmission once they were on the ground and cellular service resumed. Incident on Flight 1847. 2 assaults documented. Garrett Wade, Seat 23B. Notify relevant authorities. Love S. The message formality would seem odd to anyone reading without context. Notify relevant authorities. Not call the police. Not I need help. Something more specific, more federal, more aligned with protocols that existed outside civilian experience. The phrasing suggested relationship to someone who could actually notify relevant authorities, who had access to channels beyond standard emergency services, who operated in spaces where proper notification mattered more than emotional urgency. But to any casual observer, it just looked like someone who stayed calm under pressure, who maintained composure even after assault. Wade sat in 23B, his earlier aggression mellowing into something uglier, satisfaction mixed with anticipation. He leaned toward the aisle, voice pitched to Carrie. Airport cops are friends of mine. Good luck with your complaint. Simone didn't respond. Didn't need to. Let him believe what he wanted. Belief didn't alter reality. It just made the correction more dramatic when reality finally asserted itself. Vanessa posted her third and final update while the plane was still airborne, still 40 minutes from touchdown. This video was her masterpiece, a montage combining footage from all 3 confrontations, edited to remove context, spliced to suggest a narrative where Simone had been aggressive from boarding through landing. The caption did the heavy lifting. Full story. Unstable passenger attacks. Military veteran on flight, then plays victim when crew intervenes. Pilot had to threaten emergency landing to maintain control. Prayers for the crew. Airline heroes, 127,000 views before wheels touched pavement. Media outlets began picking up the story. Their social media accounts sharing Vanessa's footage with headlines that assumed truth in her framing. Unruly passenger causes mid-air chaos. Flight attendants forced to intervene in physical altercation. Woman claims discrimination after starting fight. The digital pile-on was comprehensive and swift. Simone's character was being assassinated in real time by people who'd never met her, who knew nothing beyond 30 seconds of edited video, who filled in gaps with assumptions that said more about themselves than about her. She remained seated while the plane taxied, while passengers gathered their belongings and crowded the aisle in their rush to deplane. Wade stood, stretching, making deliberate eye contact with her. "See you at baggage claim," he said, the threat implicit but clear. Simone stayed silent, hands folded in her lap, phone secure in her pocket. The recording had stopped automatically when the device's motion sensors detected landing. 2 hours, 41 minutes of audio. Everything captured. Everything preserved. The cabin door opened with its characteristic hydraulic hiss. Passengers began shuffling forward in the peculiar shuffle-stop rhythm of deplaning. But before the line progressed more than 3 rows, 3 figures appeared in the doorway. Dark suits, federal badges displayed on lanyards, expressions that conveyed authority without aggression, purpose without apology. The lead agent stepped into the cabin, eyes scanning faces until they locked onto 23B. Garrett Wade? Wade's confidence didn't falter immediately. He'd dealt with police before, knew how these encounters typically developed, believed his connections would insulate him from consequences. "That's me. I'm the victim here. She attacked me verbally, and when I defended myself..." You are under arrest for assault on an aircraft in violation of Title 49, United States Code, Section 46506. The words landed like physical blows, each syllable carrying weight that changed the cabin's entire atmosphere. Passengers who'd been preparing to exit froze, phones emerging from pockets to document this new development. Vanessa's hand shook slightly as she raised her device, capturing footage she hadn't anticipated, didn't know how to frame. Wade's face cycled through emotions, confusion, anger, disbelief, then something approaching fear as the second agent produced handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The Miranda warning echoed through the cabin, familiar from television but carrying different weight when delivered in person. When the handcuffs clicked closed around wrists, when the arrest was happening to someone 3 feet away rather than on a screen. Wade lunged toward Simone, the movement instinctive and ineffective. The agents restrained him easily, their training and positioning making his resistance futile. You set me up! Who are you? Simone gathered her backpack, slinging it over one shoulder with practiced ease. She walked past Wade, meeting his eyes with expression that gave away nothing. A passenger, with a phone. The answer was technically accurate and completely insufficient. Wade's confusion was visible, genuine. The calculations running behind his eyes, trying to understand how a random woman in economy class had somehow triggered federal law enforcement response. Federal Bureau of Investigation agent Torres, the lead agent who'd made the arrest, turned slightly as Simone approached. Ms. Harper, we'll need your statement. The tone was respectful, professional, but something in it suggested more than standard victim-witness protocol. Torres didn't sound like he was talking to someone who needed protection. He sounded like he was talking to someone who understood exactly what came next. I have a recording, 2 hours, 16 minutes, unedited with timestamps. Torres's expression shifted slightly, a small smile forming. Of course you do. The response carried meaning beyond its surface. Of course you do. Not surprise, not gratitude, recognition. As if he'd expected exactly this level of preparation from her, as if her competence confirmed something he already knew. This is just the beginning. Subscribe now, because the revelations coming in Part 2 will expose a conspiracy that reaches far beyond one violent passenger. At the gate, Rex Holden waited with his standard passenger recovery protocols prepared. The airline's preferred approach to incidents involved quick settlements, sympathetic corporate representatives, non-disclosure agreements that protected the brand while compensating the aggrieved. He'd successfully managed 14 similar situations in 18 months. The machinery was efficient. But when FBI agents emerged from the jetway with a passenger in custody, Rex's careful composure cracked. He pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. Federal involvement. Need legal immediately. The response came within seconds from Bryce Langford. On my way. 20 minutes. Rex watched as more agents filed past, not just the 3 who'd boarded the aircraft, but 6 additional personnel who'd been waiting in the terminal. This wasn't standard response to an in-flight disturbance. This was coordinated, planned, suggesting advance warning that someone on that flight mattered enough to warrant this level of attention. Simone exited the jetway into the terminal proper, blinking slightly at the natural light after 3 hours of cabin fluorescence. The terminal's normal chaos, families reuniting, business travelers rushing to connections, the ambient noise of rolling luggage and overhead announcements felt almost surreal after the contained intensity of the aircraft. A second FBI agent approached her, this one female, her badge identifying her as Special Agent Chen. "Ms. Harper, we have an interview room prepared. If you're willing to provide a statement now, we can expedite processing." "I'm willing," Simone said. They walked through the terminal, the agents flanking her in a formation that looked casual but provided security against approach from any direction. Passengers glanced at them, the federal badges drawing attention. Speculation forming about what crime necessitated this response in an airport terminal. Vanessa tried to follow, her phone still recording, but Agent Chen turned with expression that conveyed everything necessary. "Ma'am, we'll need your phone. Evidence in a federal investigation." Vanessa's face paled. "What? No. My content, my followers. Obstruction of a federal investigation carries serious penalties. The phone, now." The choice was binary and simple. Vanessa handed over her device, watching as Chen placed it in an evidence bag, sealed it, initialed the seal. 14 months of coordination with Rex, $48,000 in consulting fees, all of it potentially exposed through message histories and payment records that existed in digital form on the phone, now secured as federal evidence. Outside baggage claim, Rex intercepted Simone before she could reach the exit. His expression had shifted from confident airline representative to something more uncertain, more desperate. "Ms. Harper, Rex Holden, Airline Operations. I'm deeply sorry for what you experienced." "Are you?" The question was simple, direct, requiring actual engagement rather than scripted sympathy. "We'd like to offer compensation. First-class upgrade vouchers, $5,000 in travel credit, and—" He paused, calculating. "$25,000 for your trouble. Settled quietly. No lawyers, no media, just resolution." The offer was substantial by most standards. $25,000 was more than many people earned in 6 months, enough to make problems disappear for those who couldn't afford protracted legal battles. Rex had successfully deployed this strategy 13 times previously. 14 cases, 14 settlements, 14 non-disclosure agreements that buried incidents before they became scandals. "And if I refuse?" Rex's expression hardened slightly, the sympathetic corporate representative giving way to something more calculating. "Then we'll have to investigate your role. The footage we've seen shows you were combative. Our legal team will defend the crew's actions vigorously. Litigation could take years, cost you far more than $25,000 in legal fees alone. I'd suggest thinking carefully." The threat was delivered politely, dressed in concern, but unmistakable in its intent. Accept the settlement, or face the full weight of corporate legal resources deployed to destroy your credibility, to drag out proceedings until financial pressure forced settlement on worse terms, to make the fight more expensive than surrender. Simone met his eyes steadily. "I'll think about it." Rex's relief was visible, his confidence returning. "Smart decision. I'll have paperwork sent to your email tonight." "You'll have my attorney's information instead," Simone said. "She'll be in touch." She walked away before he could respond, leaving Rex standing in the terminal, his expression cycling through confusion to concern to something approaching panic, as he realized his standard protocol had just failed comprehensively. Simone reached her car in short-term parking, unlocking it with her key fob, settling into the driver's seat. The familiar space felt surreal after the intensity of the previous 3 hours. She sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing deeply, letting the adrenaline that had sustained her through confrontation slowly dissipate. Then she made a call, speaker enabled. "Aviation Law Group, this is Judith speaking." "Judith, this is Simone Harper. I need to schedule a consultation regarding an incident on Flight 1847 this afternoon. What kind of incident? Assault on aircraft, Title 49, United States Code, Section 46506, plus civil actions for defamation, negligence, and conspiracy. The pause on the other end stretched for 3 seconds. Conspiracy? Between airline management and a social media influencer to suppress federal crime reporting. I have documentation. Come to the office tomorrow at 9. Bring everything. Simone ended the call, started the engine, pulled out of the parking structure. The drive home would take 40 minutes in current traffic. 40 minutes to process, to organize her thoughts, to prepare for whatever came next. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The ID showed E. She answered, activating the car's hands-free system. Hey! Ethan Harper's voice filled the car's interior, carried through speakers designed to reproduce audio with minimal distortion. Got your text. FBI confirmed Wade's in custody. How did you... Simone let the question trail off. She knew better than to ask for details about his sources, his access, his particular network of contacts that existed in spaces she couldn't enter. I made some calls. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Bruise forming on my cheek, nothing serious. Good. The relief in his voice was palpable. But there's more, isn't there? You mentioned conspiracy. The airline manager tried to bribe me. $25,000 for silence. And the influencer who filmed everything, she's been posting edited footage that makes me look like the aggressor. They're connected. I saw messages between them during the initial investigation. You think they've done this before? I know they have. The patterns are too practiced, too efficient. This isn't their first time managing an incident. Ethan was quiet for several seconds, processing. Need me to come home early? The offer was genuine, but they both knew the complications involved. Early return from deployment required justifications that climbed chains of command, explanations that revealed more than operational security typically permitted. No, I've got this, but Ethan, the air marshal on that flight, he knew my name before introduction. The pause stretched longer this time, weighted with significance. Cross was on your flight? You know him? We've worked together. I'll explain when I get home. But Simone, stay sharp. If Cross was assigned to that flight, someone flagged it in advance. Someone knew something was going to happen. The implication settled over her like physical weight. Random assault was one thing. Premeditated targeting was another entirely. And if federal resources had been positioned in advance, if someone had anticipated violence before the plane even left the gate, then Wade's attack wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. I'll be careful, she said. Always are. Love you. Love you too. The call ended, leaving Simone alone with her thoughts, and the growing realization that what had seemed like isolated incident was actually something far more complex, far more dangerous, far more connected to her husband's classified life than she'd initially understood. 3 days later, in a conference room designed for depositions, Vanessa Caldwell sat across from Judith Klein, Simone's attorney. The aviation law specialist had built her practice around defending passengers against airline negligence, corporate overreach, and the particular varieties of injustice that occurred at 37,000 feet. Ms. Caldwell, Judith began, her voice carrying the measured precision of someone who'd conducted hundreds of these interviews. You posted on social media that my client attacked Mr. Wade. Did you witness her strike him? Vanessa shifted in her seat, suddenly aware that her carefully curated social media presence didn't translate well to legal proceedings where words carried consequences beyond engagement metrics. She was aggressive. That's not what I asked. Did you see her strike him? Not, not physically strike, no. But her tone isn't assault. You also posted that the pilot threatened emergency landing. Did you hear that communication from the cockpit? People were saying, hearsay. You fabricated that detail for dramatic effect? I didn't fabricate. I curated my perspective. Judith's expression remained neutral, but her next question carried edge. So, you curated a false narrative for clicks? For engagement? For the advertising revenue that posts like yours generate? I was just sharing my experience. Your experience? Or your business model? Judith pulled out documents, spreading them across the table. I have analytics from your Instagram account. $14,000 in advertising revenue from posts about Ms. Harper's alleged behavior. I also have bank records showing a $3,000 wire transfer from Rex Holden's business account 2 days after landing. What was that payment for? Vanessa's face drained of color. The carefully constructed separation between her content creation and Rex's settlement management, the layers of deniability they'd built through vague communication and coded language, all of it was collapsing under documentation that proved financial connection between them. I need my lawyer, Vanessa said quietly. Of course you do, Judith replied, making notes on her legal pad. We'll continue this discussion when your counsel is present. But Ms. Caldwell, you should know that your phone, currently held as federal evidence, contains 18 months of communications with Mr. Holden. Every message, every payment, every coordinated incident. The FBI's digital forensics team is very thorough. Vanessa left the conference room trembling, her social media empire crumbling in real time as followers abandoned her accounts, as sponsors pulled contracts, as the internet turned its attention from Simone as villain to Vanessa as architect of false narrative. Meanwhile, Bryce Langford filed his opening motion in Garrett Wade's criminal case. The document was aggressive, theatrical, designed to intimidate through volume and accusation even though its legal foundations were questionable at best. Motion to dismiss. Defense argues Ms. Harper's alleged injuries are self-inflicted for purpose of fraud. Claims she provoked Mr. Wade through racially charged language. Requests sanctions against Federal Bureau of Investigation for wrongful arrest based on insufficient evidence. Judith read the motion with expression combining professional assessment and personal disgust. He's throwing everything at the wall, she told Simone during their follow-up consultation. Will any of it stick? Not a chance, but he's buying time. And there's something else. Bryce also represents the airline in labor disputes. That's a conflict of interest. If Garrett and the airline end up blaming each other for your assault, Bryce can't defend both. The complication would become relevant soon enough. But in that moment, Simone was more interested in the email that had arrived in her inbox an hour earlier. Sender, truth in the air, routed through an anonymizing service that made source identification nearly impossible. Ms. Harper, you're not Rex Holden's first target. Attached, 14 prior settlements with passengers. All black, all paid to stay quiet. Flight attendant Craig Denton received $2,000 per case for writing favorable reports. Check his bank records. A friend. The attachment contained spreadsheets, bank records, settlement agreements with names redacted, but patterns clear. 14 cases over 18 months. 14 black passengers accused of various infractions. Aggressive behavior, intoxication, refusing crew instructions. 14 settlements ranging from $15,000 to $40,000. 14 non-disclosure agreements that buried the incidents. And Craig Denton's bank records showing deposits of exactly $2,000 within a week of each settlement date. Simone forwarded everything to Judith with a simple message. This is systematic. We need DOJ. Federal Bureau of Investigation background checks operated with efficiency that most people found unsettling when they learned the scope. Every arrest triggered automatic database queries, pulling information from local, state, and federal systems, compiling histories that revealed patterns invisible to individual jurisdictions. Garrett Wade's background check completed 72 hours post-arrest. Agent Torres reviewed the results in his office, his expression growing progressively grimmer as he scrolled through the accumulated data. Garrett Wade, age 46, former police officer, Richmond Police Department. Terminated 2019 for excessive force. 3 separate incidents involving 2 black civilians. Subject of 2020. Department of Justice Civil Rights Investigation. Case dismissed on qualified immunity grounds. Currently unemployed. The history was damning enough on its own. A pattern of violence against black civilians protected by legal doctrines that shielded police from accountability. But then Torres reached the attachment that changed everything. A photograph from Wade's police file. Wade in uniform, standing beside a younger man in navy fatigues. The date stamp showed 2018. The location metadata indicated a joint training facility where local law enforcement coordinated with military personnel on tactics and procedure. Torres pulled up his secure messaging system, typing rapidly. Need to schedule meeting with Harper. New evidence regarding motive. The response came within minutes. Tomorrow 0900. Bring the photo. That meeting would reveal connections that transformed assault from crime of opportunity into premeditated targeting. But those revelations belonged to tomorrow. Tonight, Torres forwarded the background check to the Assistant United States Attorney handling Wade's prosecution, to Internal Affairs investigators reviewing Richmond PD's history of excessive force, to Department of Justice civil rights attorneys building pattern or practice cases against departments that protected officers like Wade. The machinery of justice, slow and grinding, had begun its work. The photograph appeared on Agent Torres's screen at 7:43 in the morning, 3 days after Garrett Wade's arrest. Federal Building, Charlotte office. Coffee cooled in a mug beside his keyboard while he studied the image with increasing attention. 2 men in tactical gear, arms crossed, standing in front of a training facility that bore Department of Defense markings. The date stamp read April 2018. The younger man on the right wore Navy insignia. The man on the left was Garrett Wade, 20 pounds lighter, police uniform crisp and professional. Torres pulled up the classified database he rarely needed to access, entering credentials that required biometric verification beyond standard password protocols. The search took 47 seconds, longer than typical queries, suggesting the system was cross-referencing multiple secured networks. When results populated, Torres read through them twice, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to something approaching concern. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he'd committed to memory rather than storing in any device. "This is Torres. I need to move up the Harper meeting. Today, if possible." The voice on the other end was measured, unhurried. What changed? Motive. Wade didn't pick a random target. He knew exactly who she was. 9 o'clock found Simone sitting across from Torres and a Department of Justice attorney whose credentials identified her as Karen Lim, Assistant United States Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina. The interview room was designed for witness testimony rather than interrogation. Comfortable chairs, adequate lighting, recording equipment visible but not intrusive. A laptop sat closed on the table between them. Torres opened a folder, sliding the first document toward Simone. the audio recording transcription, timestamps, and voice identification markers dotting the margins. Let's start with your documentation. The recording you provided was analyzed by our technical division. Voice patterns confirmed. Timeline verified. No evidence of tampering or editing. It's admissible in multiple proceedings. Simone nodded, unsurprised. She'd known the recording's value when she activated it, understood that proper documentation would matter more than emotion or testimony alone. "We'd like to play segments for the record," Lim said, her fingers moving to the laptop keyboard. "If you need breaks at any point—" "I don't need breaks. Play what you need." The speakers crackled. Then Garrett Wade's voice filled the room, preserved in digital clarity that eliminated ambiguity. "You think you're smart? I know your type, always playing victim." Simone's response, calm and clear. "My type? Don't act ignorant. You know exactly what I mean." Sound of impact. Simone's sharp breath. The cabin's collective reaction, muted but audible. "That's what you get for running your mouth." Lim stopped the playback, making notes on her legal pad. Title 49, United States Code, Section 46506, Assault on Aircraft. The recording removes any ambiguity about what occurred and his motivation. Torres leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting into territory that suggested the conversation was about to pivot into less straightforward terrain. "Ms. Harper, there's additional context we need to discuss. Context that changes the nature of this case significantly." He opened the laptop, rotating it so Simone could see the screen. The photograph appeared. Two men in tactical gear against a background she recognized, even though she'd never been to that particular facility. Her husband had mentioned the joint training program once, years ago, in the careful language he used when discussing work that brushed against classified operations. "Do you recognize the man on the right?" "That's my husband." Her voice remained steady despite the implications crystallizing in her mind. "Commander Ethan Harper." "And the man on the left?" "That's Garrett Wade." Torres pulled up another document, this one stamped with Department of Justice headers and redaction marks that obscured sensitive details while leaving key facts visible. "In 2019, your husband testified at an internal affairs hearing regarding Wade's conduct during a joint operation. The testimony resulted in Wade's termination from Richmond Police Department. Wade was subsequently investigated by DOJ Civil Rights Division for pattern of excessive force against minority civilians. The investigation was closed based on qualified immunity protections, but the underlying conduct was documented." Simone absorbed the information in silence, mental calculations running parallel tracks. Wade's attack hadn't been opportunistic. He'd recognized her surname when she boarded, had positioned himself deliberately in the adjacent seat, had created confrontation with the specific goal of causing harm. "Wade targeted me about because of Ethan's testimony." "Yes." Lim's confirmation carried weight beyond the single syllable. "This wasn't random assault. This was premeditated retaliation against a federal witness through assault on his spouse. That changes charging calculations and potential sentencing significantly. The distinction mattered in ways that civilians rarely understood. Random assault on aircraft carried serious federal penalties. Premeditated targeting of a federal witness's family member activated additional statutes, enhanced sentencing provisions, elevated the crime into territory where prosecutorial resources increased proportionally. "Does Ethan know?" Simone asked. "He's being briefed simultaneously," Torres said. "He's stateside as of last night. Emergency leave approved through his chain of command." The phrase emergency leave carried implications about what strings had been pulled. What justifications had been provided to extract a Navy SEAL from active deployment? Those details would come later, in private conversations bound by security protocols and marital trust that had been tested but not broken by years of necessary secrecy. Her phone vibrated against the table. A text from the contact, saved as E, appeared on the locked screen. "On my way to you. 2 hours out. We'll talk." She showed the message to Torres, who nodded acknowledgement. "We'll schedule follow-up for when Commander Harper can attend. His testimony regarding Wade's history will be crucial for establishing motive and premeditation." "There's something else." Simone pulled out her own phone, navigating to her email, pulling up the anonymous message she'd received 2 days prior. "I received this from an unknown sender. 14 prior incidents matching the pattern from my flight, all involving black passengers, all settled with non-disclosure agreements, all with documented payments to Craig Denton for favorable incident reports." Lim's expression hardened as she scrolled through the attached spreadsheets. Bank records showing deposits to Denton's account, settlement agreements with consistent language and structure, a pattern of systematic discrimination disguised as passenger management. "This is racketeering," Lim said quietly. Rex Holden was running a scheme. Vanessa Caldwell identified targets based on race, created inflammatory social media content. Denton provided documentation supporting the airline's position, and Holden settled quickly with non-disclosure agreements that buried the pattern. They've been doing this for 18 months. Can you prosecute? We can investigate. Whether we prosecute depends on what we find, and whether victims are willing to testify despite their NDAs. Non-disclosure agreements can't protect criminal conspiracy, but proving conspiracy requires multiple witnesses and documentary evidence. Lim made notes rapidly, her legal training evident in the way she was already constructing prosecutorial strategy. "This goes beyond your case. This is systemic fraud against passengers and the federal aviation system." Torres closed his laptop, his expression settling into something approaching satisfaction. "Ms. Harper, you've given us more than assault documentation. You've exposed a conspiracy that's been operating under federal oversight for over a year. That matters." 3 days later, Vanessa Caldwell's attorney accompanied her to a continuation of her deposition. The lawyer, a civil defense specialist who normally handled slip-and-fall cases, looked uncomfortable in the federal building, clearly out of his depth in proceedings involving multiple federal agencies and conspiracy allegations. Judith Klein resumed her questioning with the efficiency of someone who'd spent the intervening days preparing for exactly this continuation. "Ms. Caldwell, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 7. This is a printout of your Instagram analytics for posts dated March through November of this year. Can you confirm these are accurate?" Vanessa glanced at the document, then at her attorney, who nodded reluctantly. "Yes." The highlighted entries show 14 posts about passenger incidents on flights. Total advertising revenue from those posts, $48,312. Is that correct? If that's what the spreadsheet says. I'm asking if it's accurate. Did you earn approximately $48,000 from posts about passenger conflicts? Yes. Judith pulled out another document, this one bearing bank letterhead and transaction details. Exhibit 8. Wire transfers from StratOps Consulting LLC to your business account. StratOps is registered to Rex Holden. 14 transfers over 18 months, ranging from $1,000 to $5,000 each. Total, $39,000. What were these payments for? Vanessa's attorney interjected. My client invokes her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination regarding the source and purpose of those payments. Judith made a note, her expression unchanged. Understood. For the record, Ms. Caldwell is declining to explain why she received $39,000 from the airline operations manager whose flights provided the incidents she monetized through social media. No further questions at this time. The deposition ended with Vanessa understanding that her carefully constructed business model, turning human conflict into engagement metrics, transforming other people's trauma into revenue streams, had collapsed entirely. Her follower count had dropped from 143,000 to 11,000. Sponsorships had terminated. The consulting fees from Rex had stopped the moment FBI seized her phone, and now she faced potential criminal conspiracy charges in addition to Simone's civil defamation suit. She left the federal building through a side entrance, avoiding the handful of protesters who'd gathered after learning about the discrimination pattern. Signs reading "Justice for Passengers" and "End Airline Racism" lined the sidewalk. Vanessa's face was recognizable enough from her own social media that attempting to exit through the main entrance would have invited confrontation she wasn't equipped to handle. This story proves that truth prevails when victims refuse to stay silent. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this legal battle unfolds. 6 days after the initial incident, Craig Denton sat in a different interview room in the same federal building. His union representative occupied the chair beside him, reviewing documents that outlined the case federal investigators were building against him. The evidence was comprehensive enough that the representative had already suggested cooperation rather than defense. An FBI agent Denton didn't recognize conducted the interview, her questions precise and informed by the documentary evidence spread across the table between them. "Mr. Denton, we have bank records showing 14 deposits of exactly $2,000 to your checking account over 18 months. The deposits correlate with dates immediately following passenger incident resolutions. Can you explain these payments?" Denton looked at his representative, who nodded slightly. They'd already discussed this outcome, already negotiated the framework of a proffer agreement that would reduce his exposure in exchange for testimony against Holden and Caldwell. "Rex Holden paid me to write incident reports that favored the airline's position in passenger disputes. He'd identify passengers he considered problematic. They were always black passengers, and I'd document them as aggressive or non-compliant even when their behavior didn't warrant that characterization." "You falsified federal aviation incident reports?" The question carried weight beyond its simplicity. Falsifying federal documents violated Title 18, United States Code, Section 1001. The statute carried penalties up to 5 years imprisonment. Denton's cooperation could reduce that substantially, potentially eliminating prison time entirely in exchange for testimony that would be far more damaging to Holden than to himself. "Yes, I falsified reports at Rex Holden's direction in exchange for cash payments. He told me it was just making things easier, smoothing out complications. I didn't realize until recently that it was part of a larger scheme with the social media influencer." The agent made notes, her expression neutral. "How many reports did you falsify?" 14, that I can specifically remember. Possibly more. The payments were always $2,000, always within a week of the incident, always deposited as cash, so there wouldn't be electronic record of the transfer source. But there were electronic records. Bank surveillance captured you making the deposits. Security footage shows you meeting with Holden in parking lots where the cash exchanged hands. "Mr. Denton, you're not as careful as you believed yourself to be." The observation landed with finality. Denton's careful scheme, his belief that cash payments eliminated evidence trails, his assumption that nobody would connect his deposits to Holden's incident management, all of it had been illusion, the kind of false security that unraveled under federal scrutiny. His testimony would be detailed, comprehensive, and devastating to Rex Holden's defense. In exchange, Denton would receive probation, would lose his flight attendant certification permanently, would carry a federal conviction that would limit his employment options for the rest of his life. But he wouldn't go to prison. That distinction mattered more than pride, more than loyalty to an employer who'd used him as instrument of discrimination. 6 months post-incident, Garrett Wade's trial date approached with momentum that defense attorney Bryce Langford couldn't slow, despite aggressive motion practice. Every procedural challenge had been denied. Every attempt to suppress evidence had failed. The recording was admissible. The air marshal's testimony was allowed. The photograph connecting Wade to Ethan Harper and the internal affairs hearing would be presented to the jury. Bryce sat across from Wade in the attorney visiting room at the Federal Detention Center. Manila folders containing plea offer documents spread between them. "The prosecution's case is airtight," Bryce said, his usual confidence diminished by weeks of losing every pre-trial motion. "The recording eliminates any claim of self-defense. The air marshal's testimony confirms you struck her unprovoked. Ethan Harper's testimony establishes premeditation through your documented threats after the internal affairs hearing." Wade's face had changed during 6 months of pre-trial detention. Weight loss sharpened features already angular, making him look older than his 46 years. The confidence that had carried him through the assault, through the arrest, through the initial court appearances, had eroded under the reality of facing 20 years in federal prison. "So, what are my options?" "Plead guilty. The government is offering 5 years federal prison, 3 years supervised release, $50,000 restitution to Ms. Harper. You serve approximately 4 years with good behavior. You're released with restrictions, but you're not spending 2 decades in prison." "And if I go to trial?" "You lose. The jury convicts you of assault on aircraft with enhancement for targeting a federal witness's family member. Judge Brennan sentences you to the maximum, 20 years. You serve 17 minimum before parole consideration." "Wade, you're 46 years old. You'd be 63 when released. Or you take the plea, you're out before you're 51. The math isn't complicated." Wade stared at the plea documents, reading conditions that required him to allocate fault, to admit striking Simone without provocation, to acknowledge targeting her because of her relationship to Ethan Harper. The words would become part of permanent federal record, would eliminate any future claims of innocence, would define him as perpetrator rather than victim of circumstances beyond his control. "They're destroying me," he said quietly. "No, you destroyed yourself. You assaulted a woman on a federal aircraft because you were angry at her husband. That's not circumstance. That's choice, and now you face consequences for that choice. Sign the plea agreement or go to trial. Those are your options." Wade signed. 2 weeks later, he stood before Judge Rachel Brennan for plea allocation. The courtroom was less than half full. Federal criminal proceedings rarely drew crowds unless the defendant was famous or the crime particularly sensational. Simone sat in the gallery, Ethan beside her in civilian clothes, both watching as Wade prepared to admit guilt. Judge Brennan reviewed the plea agreement with meticulous attention to detail, ensuring Wade understood each condition and consequence before accepting his guilty plea. "Mr. Wade, you're pleading guilty to assault on an aircraft in violation of Title 49, United States Code Section 46506. Do you understand this charge?" "Yes, Your Honor." "The plea agreement requires you to allocate, to describe in your own words what you did and why. Please proceed." Wade's voice was quiet, stripped of the aggression that had characterized him on the aircraft. On Flight 1847, I intentionally sat near Simone Harper because I recognized her surname and knew she was married to Commander Ethan Harper. Commander Harper had testified against me at an internal affairs hearing in 2019, testimony that resulted in my termination from Richmond Police Department. I was angry about that outcome. When Ms. Harper reclined her seat during the flight, I used it as excuse to start a confrontation. I verbally threatened her, then struck her on the side of the head with my open hand. I did this to hurt her as retaliation against her husband. She didn't provoke me. She hadn't done anything wrong. I targeted her deliberately because of who she was married to. The allegation was clear, unambiguous, eliminating any possible future claim that he'd been defending himself or responding to provocation. The words would exist in transcript form, available to civil attorneys, to media outlets, to anyone researching the case for years to come. Judge Brennan made notes before responding. Mr. Wade, you targeted a woman for assault because of anger at her husband's truthful testimony about your professional misconduct. You transformed a commercial aircraft into a venue for personal revenge. You endangered flight safety and violated federal law specifically designed to protect passengers and crew from exactly this kind of violence. Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done? Yes, Your Honor. Plea accepted. Sentencing is scheduled for 60 days from today. You remain in custody pending sentencing. Wade was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his brief appearance concluding with mechanical efficiency. Simone and Ethan left through the main entrance, declining to speak with the two reporters who'd shown up to cover the plea hearing. The criminal case was effectively over. Civil proceedings continued on separate tracks, but Wade's guilty plea eliminated most of his defenses in those cases as well. Outside the courthouse, Ethan spoke for the first time since they'd entered the building. How do you feel? Simone considered the question, searching for honest answer rather than expected one. Relieved, tired, angry that it took 6 months to get here, but mostly just ready for this part to be finished. It's not finished yet. No, but we're past the hardest part. They walked to the parking structure in silence, two people who'd learned through years of marriage how to exist comfortably without constant conversation, how to process individually while remaining connected. The remainder of the day would involve coordination with attorneys, reviewing settlement offer progressions in the civil cases, preparing for Ethan's testimony when proceedings continued against Holden and Caldwell. But for now, they simply walked. Vanessa Caldwell's civil settlement came first, negotiated through her attorney and her homeowner's insurance carrier once it became clear that defending the defamation case would cost more than settling it. The amount was substantial, $1.2 million, funded through a combination of insurance payout and liquidation of Vanessa's assets. The settlement also required a public apology video posted to her Instagram account without editing or qualification. Vanessa recorded it in her attorney's office, makeup-free, the ring light she'd once used for content creation now illuminating her without enhancement. My name is Vanessa Caldwell. 6 months ago, I posted videos and statements about Simone Harper that were false. I edited footage to make her appear aggressive when she was actually the victim of assault. I claimed she'd started a physical altercation when security footage and multiple witnesses confirmed she never struck anyone. I said the pilot threatened emergency landing when that never occurred. I posted these lies because I knew they would generate engagement, advertising revenue, and payment from the airline operations manager who was running a scheme to silence passengers who experienced discrimination. She paused, the words clearly difficult despite being negotiated and approved by attorneys before recording. I did this for money. I monetized Simone Harper's trauma for profit. I contributed to a pattern of discrimination that targeted black passengers specifically. I am deeply sorry for the harm I caused to Ms. Harper and to the other passengers who were victimized by the scheme I participated in. I'm selling my assets to pay the settlement judgment against me. I'm no longer working as a content creator. This is my final post. The video was posted at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. Within 24 hours, it had accumulated 2.3 million views. Most of them from people who'd shared her original false posts, who'd contributed to the pile-on against Simone, who now faced their own complicity in spreading misinformation. The comments section filled with reactions ranging from appreciation for accountability to anger at the deception to skepticism about whether her apology was genuine or simply strategic. Simone watched the video once, at Judith's office, with her attorney present to witness her reaction for the record. "Sufficient?" Judith asked. "It'll do." The settlement funds would be transferred within 30 days. The payment schedule staggered to accommodate Vanessa's asset liquidation. The money mattered less than the public acknowledgement, the permanent record that Simone had been telling truth, while Vanessa had been constructing profitable fiction. Transglobal Airlines settled 2 months after Vanessa's video posted. The amount was larger, $2.1 million, but the settlement's real value existed in its structural requirements rather than monetary compensation. The airline agreed to mandatory anti-bias training for all crew members, to independent review of incident reports from the previous 3 years, to termination of Rex Holden and Craig Denton with cause, to implementation of real-time incident reporting systems that would flag patterns for Department of Transportation review. The settlement included standard language that the airline admitted no wrongdoing, a legal fiction that protected corporate image while acknowledging harm through substantial payment. Simone accepted it with full understanding that justice existed in degrees, that complete vindication was rare, that systemic change came through persistent pressure rather than single dramatic victory. Rex Holden was terminated within a week of settlement execution. His personnel file, once protected by employment privacy regulations, became discoverable through the settlement's transparency requirements. The documentation revealed 6 prior complaints about discriminatory incident management, all dismissed through internal review, all buried before they could reach external oversight. He applied for positions at 17 other airlines over the following months. All 17 declined to hire him once his name appeared in background checks connected to federal discrimination investigations. The aviation industry was large, but interconnected enough that reputation mattered, that systematic racism exposed at one carrier raised questions that other carriers couldn't ignore. Rex eventually found work in freight logistics, managing warehouse operations for a company that shipped automotive parts. No passenger contact, no authority over incident management, no opportunities to run schemes that targeted vulnerable travelers for profit. His income dropped by 60%. His professional reputation was destroyed. The consequences were proportionate, if not quite equivalent, to the harm he'd caused. Craig Denton's outcome was similar but distinct. His cooperation had protected him from prison, but not from permanent loss of his flight attendant certification. The Federal Aviation Administration revoked his credentials with notation that revocation was based on falsification of federal documents, ensuring that no other airline would hire him regardless of rehabilitation efforts. He worked as a conflict resolution trainer for a nonprofit that provided professional development to service industry workers. The irony wasn't lost on him. Teaching others how to de-escalate situations he'd intentionally inflamed, instructing on ethical conduct he'd violated systematically, modeling behavior he'd failed to demonstrate when it mattered. His sessions included frank discussion of his role in the trans-global discrimination scheme, using his own failures as cautionary example. The authenticity made him effective as instructor, even as it served as constant reminder of choices that had permanently altered his career trajectory. Bryce Langford faced his own reckoning through the North Carolina State Bar. Judith's ethics complaint had triggered investigation into his representation of both Wade and Trans-Global Airlines despite conflict of interest, his aggressive victim-blaming in court filings, his motion practice that crossed the line from zealous advocacy into harassment. The bar's findings were issued 8 months post-incident, public record available to anyone searching his name. Attorney Bryce Langford violated Rule 1.7 regarding conflicts of interest by simultaneously representing criminal defendant Garrett Wade and Trans-Global Airlines when their interests were materially adverse. Respondent violated Rule 3.1 by filing motions containing allegations lacking evidentiary support. Respondent violated Rule 8.4 by conduct prejudicial to administration of justice through victim-blaming tactics designed to intimidate rather than advocate. Sanction: 6-month suspension of law license, completion of legal ethics training, public reprimand. The suspension was time-limited, but the public reprimand was permanent, attached to his bar profile for the remainder of his career. Legal blogs and aviation law forums discussed his case as example of how not to defend aviation assault cases, how zealous advocacy became unethical conduct, how protecting aggressive clients ultimately damaged everyone involved, including the attorney. Bryce's practice lost 60% of its clients during his suspension. The remaining clients were bargain hunters, attracted by his reduced rates and damaged reputation. The kind of clients whose cases were unlikely to generate referrals or professional satisfaction. His career continued, but in diminished form. Object lesson in how ethical violations created consequences beyond immediate sanctions. The justice system worked here because one person documented everything and refused to back down. Subscribe to see more stories where accountability wins. The Federal Aviation Administration issued Directive 2024-18, 11 months after Simone's flight landed. The policy change had been in development since the Department of Justice investigation into Trans-Global's discrimination pattern became public, refined through input from passenger advocacy groups, civil rights organizations, and aviation safety experts. All Part 121 air carriers must implement real-time incident reporting systems that transmit crew documentation directly to FAA oversight within 24 hours of flight completion. Crew members who fail to report qualifying incidents face certificate suspension. Airlines must conduct annual anti-discrimination training developed in consultation with DOJ Civil Rights Division. Airlines must submit quarterly reports analyzing incident patterns by passenger demographics to identify potential discrimination. The directive represented substantial policy change, shifting from reactive oversight to proactive monitoring. But implementation remained incomplete even months after issuance. The FAA lacked sufficient staff to audit compliance across dozens of carriers. Airlines lobbied for extended compliance deadlines. Training programs varied widely in quality and effectiveness. Simone read the directive in Judith's office, her expression combining satisfaction at progress achieved with realism about limitations remaining. "It's a start," Judith nodded. "Policy doesn't change culture instantly, but it creates framework for accountability that didn't exist before. That matters." "Does it matter if nobody enforces it?" "People will enforce it. Passengers who know their rights, crew members who understand reporting requirements, attorneys who can cite specific regulations when filing complaints. The directive gives us tools. Using those tools effectively, that's the next phase." 1 year after the incident, Simone and Ethan sat on their porch as evening settled across their neighborhood. The summer heat had broken slightly, making outdoor sitting comfortable rather than endurance test. Ethan had returned from his most recent deployment 3 weeks prior, this time with standard notice rather than emergency extraction. The past year had tested their marriage in ways that combat deployments and security clearances never had. The revelation that Ethan's testimony had contributed to Wade's targeting of Simone. The recognition that compartmentalization of classified information had prevented her from understanding risks she faced. The negotiations about what could be shared versus what remained protected. All of it had required conversations they'd avoided previously. Honesty, they'd both found difficult. They'd worked through it with help from a therapist who specialized in military families and security clearances, who understood the particular tensions created by relationships where one partner's work couldn't be fully disclosed to the other. The process was ongoing. Trust was being rebuilt through demonstrated commitment rather than assumptions. Congressional hearing is scheduled for next month, Simone said, referencing the invitation she'd received from the Senate Commerce Committee's Aviation Subcommittee. They want me to testify about the FAA directive's enforcement gaps. You going to do it? Of course. The directive doesn't matter if airlines can ignore it without consequences. Somebody needs to explain that to people who control FAA's budget. Ethan smiled slightly. You're not afraid of Congress. Should I be? Most people are. Most people haven't been assaulted on a commercial aircraft and then spent a year navigating federal criminal and civil proceedings. Congressional testimony is straightforward by comparison. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching neighbors walk dogs, listening to distant traffic, existing in shared space without need for constant interaction. Then Simone's phone chimed with notification of new email. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting slightly as she recognized the sender routing through anonymizing service similar to the one that had exposed the discrimination pattern months earlier. Ms. Harper, Garrett Wade received correspondence in prison. Sender unknown. Postmarked Richmond. No return address. Content. You failed, but we'll finish it. Thought you should know. Marshall Cross. She read the message twice before showing it to Ethan, who absorbed the information with expression that suggested immediate mental calculations about threat assessment and response protocols. Cross wouldn't send this unless he considered it credible. I know. We need to notify. I already have secure email drafted to relevant contacts. But Ethan, this doesn't end with Wade. He was one person acting on resentment. This suggests organization, coordination, multiple individuals who share his grievances. The implications were substantial and troubling. Random assault could be addressed through prosecution and sentencing. Organized retaliation against federal witnesses and their families represented different category of threat, one requiring resources beyond local law enforcement, attention from agencies that specialized in protecting those targeted for their cooperation with justice systems. You're considering going public? Ethan asked, recognizing the particular tone she adopted when weighing strategic decisions. I'm considering amplifying. The congressional testimony gives me platform. I can discuss not just policy gaps but ongoing threats, not just past discrimination but present danger. Make it harder for whoever sent Wade that letter to act without drawing attention they'd prefer to avoid. That increases your visibility. It also increases protection. Threatening a private citizen is different than threatening someone who's about to testify before Congress about aviation safety and civil rights. The calculation changes when the target has platform and audience. Ethan understood the logic even as he weighed risks that came with higher profile. His instinct was always toward protection through obscurity, through operational security that minimized exposure. Her instinct moved toward protection through transparency, through making silence more dangerous than speaking. Different approaches shaped by different training and experience. "Your choice," he said finally. "But I'm requesting extended stateside assignment. Already talked to my command. They're sympathetic to family security concerns." Simone took his hand, the gesture conveying appreciation that words would dilute. They'd navigated the year through combination of her competence and his support, her willingness to push systems toward change and his willingness to modify career trajectory to ensure she could do so safely. Partnership expressed through action rather than declaration. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Simone sat at her laptop accessing databases she'd gained familiarity with through the legal proceedings. The FAA's Public Incident Database, searchable by route and date. She entered parameters for Richmond to Charlotte flights over the previous 90 days. Filtering for documented passenger incidents. 27 flights. 14 incidents. 11 involving passengers identified in reports as black. The pattern continued even after Rex Holden's termination, even after Craig Denton's removal, even after transglobal settlement required policy changes and oversight. Either the discrimination was more deeply embedded in airline culture than single operations manager could explain, or the scheme had involved more participants than had been identified and prosecuted. Neither possibility suggested the problem had been solved. Both indicated her work was far from finished. She compiled the data into spreadsheet format, cross-referencing flight numbers with crew assignments where that information was publicly available, noting which routes showed repeated incidents, identifying patterns that deserved investigation beyond what she could conduct alone. The email to DOJ Civil Rights Division was concise, professional, devastating in its implications. Preliminary analysis suggests discrimination pattern at Transglobal Airlines continues post-settlement. Attached data shows 11 incidents involving black passengers across 27 Richmond-Charlotte flights in Q4, requesting investigation into whether settlement compliance is genuine or performative. Additional documentation available upon request. She sent the email, copied Judith Klein for record, then drafted her congressional testimony outline. The hearing would cover FAA enforcement mechanisms, but she could expand discussion to include ongoing discrimination as evidence that policy without enforcement accomplished nothing. Her phone buzzed with incoming message, sender unknown, routed through encryption that suggested federal or military origin. You exposed one network. Others exist. Wade wasn't working alone. Watch your back, Ms. Harper. The message could be threat or warning, intimidation or genuine concern. Without context about sender identity or motivation, interpretation was uncertain. But combined with the prison letter Cross had flagged, pattern was forming. Wade's assault hadn't been isolated incident conducted by lone actor nursing personal grievance. Simone composed response, unsure whether it would reach intended recipient, but needing to establish her position clearly. I'm watching, and I'm not stopping. If there are others, they should know. I document everything. She sent the message, closed her laptop, checked door locks and alarm system out of habit rather than fear. Whatever came next, she'd handle it the same way she'd handled everything else. With preparation, documentation, and refusal to be intimidated into silence. 2 months later, Garrett Wade sat in prison library, the communal space where inmates could access limited computer terminals for approved purposes. His access was restricted, his internet heavily monitored, his communications subject to review. But he could still receive physical mail, could still get messages from the outside despite being incarcerated. The letter had arrived 3 days ago, standard envelope with Richmond postmark, no return address. The prison's mail screening had found nothing prohibited. No contraband, no explicit threats, just single sheet of paper with typed message. You failed, but we'll finish it. Wade didn't know who'd sent it, didn't recognize the return address before it had been discarded by mail processing. But the message's meaning was clear enough. Someone outside shared his resentment, his grievance against Ethan Harper, his willingness to target Harper's family as proxy for revenge against Harper himself. He'd shown the letter to his attorney during last visit, asking whether it changed anything about his case, his sentencing. The attorney had been clear. Showing the letter helped nobody, endangered Wade by suggesting he was part of larger conspiracy, gave prosecutors ammunition to argue for enhanced sentencing based on ongoing threat. Wade had dropped it, hadn't mentioned the letter again, had let it disappear into the general chaos of prison life where lots of things disappeared without investigation or consequence. But he had kept the words in his mind, the promise that someone else would finish what he'd started, that Simone Harper wasn't safe just because he was imprisoned. It was small satisfaction in the face of 5-year sentence, but it was something. 300 miles away, in a suburban house that looked unremarkable from the street, a man Wade had served with during his police career sat at kitchen table reviewing news articles about the Harper case. He'd followed the proceedings with interest, had noted how thoroughly Wade had been prosecuted, had observed the media coverage of discrimination schemes and civil rights violations. The system had crushed Wade for doing what he'd been trained to do: assert authority, control situations, push back against civilians who didn't understand their place in hierarchy. The fact that Wade's target had been woman married to someone who'd testified against him just made the punishment more bitter, more unjust from perspective of those who believed loyalty to fellow officers trumped truth-telling. He closed his laptop, made careful note of Simone Harper's upcoming congressional testimony date, began planning how to ensure she understood that some people didn't forgive testimony that destroyed careers, didn't forget those who used federal systems against men who'd dedicated their lives to law enforcement. The planning would take time. The execution would require precision. But he had both time and capability, and unlike Wade, he wouldn't make mistakes that led to immediate arrest. He'd learned from Wade's failure. He'd be more careful. Simone Harper thought she'd won because she'd survived assault and pursued justice through proper channels. She thought documentation and legal proceedings provided protection. She thought testifying before Congress would make her safer through elevated profile. She didn't understand yet that some people viewed her survival as temporary condition, her victories as provocations, her testimony as targets marking where retribution should land. But she'd learn. Eventually, when planning converted to action, when careful preparation yielded opportunity, when the lesson Wade had started was completed by those who shared his values even if they hadn't shared his cell, she'd learn that justice was a complicated concept, that not everyone agreed about which side deserved it, that winning cases didn't mean winning safety. She'd learn. The man closed his notebook, put it in drawer that locked, went about his evening routine with satisfaction of someone who had purpose, who had plan, who had patience to wait for exactly the right moment. Above his desk, a photograph showed younger version of himself in police uniform, standing beside Garrett Wade at training facility. Both of them committed to ideals they'd believed in. Both of them betrayed by systems that punished loyalty and rewarded those who destroyed brotherhood for the sake of political correctness. That photograph stayed on the wall, reminder of what had been lost, motivation for what needed to be reclaimed. Simone Harper's story wasn't finished. She'd testified, She'd won settlements, she'd changed policies, but the real conclusion, the one where accounts were balanced and loyalties repaid, that remained unwritten, and he held the pen. Simone stood at her kitchen window 3 weeks later, watching morning light spread across her backyard, coffee brewed behind her, the familiar sound providing comfort through routine. Her congressional testimony was scheduled for 2 days from now. Her prepared remarks were finalized. Her evidence packets were organized. She'd received 4 more encrypted messages over the past month, each one cryptic, each one suggesting knowledge of threats she couldn't quite quantify. Federal protection had been offered. She'd declined, unwilling to live under constant surveillance, preferring vigilance to restriction. Her phone buzzed with incoming call. Judith's number appeared on screen. "Morning." Judith's voice carried tension unusual for her normally composed demeanor. "Simone, DOJ just filed formal charges against 3 more transglobal employees. The investigation you prompted with that quarterly data analysis uncovered a second discrimination scheme. Different routes, different personnel, same tactics. They're arresting them this morning." "Good. There's more. One of the defendants was crew on 14 different flights where incidents occurred. His personnel file shows prior association with law enforcement groups that have documented ties to extremist organizations. FBI is treating this as potential civil rights conspiracy rather than individual discrimination cases." Simone absorbed the information, understanding crystallizing. The prison letter. The encrypted messages. This is broader than Wade, broader than Transglobal's settlement covered. "Yes, and FBI wants you to accept protection detail until they can assess extent of the network. These aren't random airline employees discriminating for profit. These are organized individuals using airline positions to target and intimidate minority passengers systemically. I'll consider the protection offer." "Simone, I said I'll consider it. I'm not hiding. But I'm also not stupid. Send me FBI contact information. I'll coordinate appropriate security." She ended the call, poured coffee she no longer wanted, pulled up the news websites that would start reporting arrests within the hour. The story she'd thought was finished kept expanding, kept revealing layers she hadn't anticipated, kept demonstrating that individual justice was necessary but insufficient when systems remained corrupted. But she didn't regret speaking, didn't regret testifying, didn't regret pushing investigations that exposed uncomfortable truths. The threats were real, but so was progress. The danger existed, but so did accountability. She'd survived this phase the same way she'd survived everything else, by being smarter than those who underestimated her, more prepared than those who assumed she'd retreat, more resilient than those who believed one person couldn't challenge entrenched systems. They'd sent Wade to prison. They'd exposed Holden's scheme. They'd changed FAA policy, and now they'd expand the investigation. Arrest more conspirators. Demonstrate that justice might be slow, but wasn't optional. Simone finished her coffee, checked her watch, began her morning routine. Congressional testimony in 2 days, FBI meeting in 3 hours. Life continuing despite threats, because that's what refusing to be intimidated looked like. Her phone displayed new message, this one from Ethan. "Home in 4 hours. Don't do anything dramatic before I get there." She smiled, typing response. Define dramatic. Already had coffee. That's my excitement quota for the morning. His reply came instantly. Liar. Stay safe. Love you. Always do. Love you too. She put the phone down, opened her laptop, began reviewing testimony notes one more time. The work continued. The threats continued. Life continued. And somewhere in federal custody, 3 more defendants were learning that discriminating against passengers for profit or ideology came with consequences, that systems could be corrupted but also corrected, that Simone Harper's refusal to stay silent had initiated cascade they couldn't stop. The story wasn't finished, but neither was she.